Today we are going to sew a canvas tote bag together. This video tutorial is meant to accompany my digital sewing pattern, so if you haven't already, you can purchase it at the link below. This sewing pattern does include 2 different sizes, so you can either make the cute little mini tote with me today, or you can make the full-size version that fits pretty much anything. I have made a couple of both, and I love them so much. I definitely use the mini one as a lunchbox, or I use it if I'm going to the store to grab a couple things. I also use the big one if I'm going to the beach or if I'm going to the grocery store and I want a reusable shopping bag, so there are endless possibilities for these bags. I do recommend reading through all the sewing instructions before you start as well, just so you know exactly what you're getting into. I also have a few links below for fabric suggestions, or I also have all the tools I'm using today linked so that you have access to them if you need anything for yourself. Before we get started sewing, let's talk about your fabric choices. So today I am using a canvas fabric for the main body of my bag. Similarly, you could also use a denim or a twill as long as they have a heavier weight to them and they don't have any stretch. I'm actually upcycling a pair of old jeans that I found, and I'm going to use that for the bottom body of my bag and also the straps. Just remember that the more structure your fabric has, the more structure your bag is going to have. So make sure you pick something with a nice heavy weight to it. This is also a good time to remember to change out the needle on your sewing machine if you need to. You'll want to use a needle that's made for these heavier fabrics. And for the pocket, I would typically use the same fabric as the main body of my bag, but today I'm using this thrifted tablecloth with this cute little fruit print on it. So we should have cut out 2 main body pieces, 2 bottom body pieces, a pocket if you so desire, 2 straps, and your lining as well. Your lining can be pretty much anything. I usually use a lightweight quilting cotton that matches the outside of my main body. As we begin, the first step is to prepare the pocket. So as you can see, I flipped it over and we're going to fold over the top edge a 1/4 inch, and you're folding it over to the wrong side of the fabric so that when we flip back to the right side, you'll see the pretty finish edge. So again, we're folding it over a 1/4 inch and ironing that, and then we're going to fold it over another 1/4 inch and we're going to iron that down so that we have a finished edge on the inside and the outside. Now we're going to take our pocket over to our sewing machine, and you're just going to hem along the edge that you just created. Now we're going to attach the pocket to the main body piece. We're going to align them at the bottom, and we want them to match up in the center. So the easiest way to do this is to fold your piece in half to find the center, and then you can use a pin to mark it. Then you'll just want to use a few pins to secure the pocket in place so that we can take this over to the machine. Now we're going to sew the pocket onto the main body. You can use a basting stitch for this. A basting stitch is just a temporary loose stitch that you use to hold the 2 pieces together before we go back over with our final stitching. You'll want to stitch about a 1/4 inch from the pocket edges, and you'll want to stitch along both sides and the bottom, leaving the top hem open. Now we're going to work on assembling our strap pieces. So we're going along the lengthwise edge of the strap, and we're going to press 1/2 inch down. And again, you can see I have the wrong side of my fabric up, and I'm pressing the 1/2 inch down onto the wrong side so that once we flip it over to the correct side, we have that nice pretty finish. When pressing your fabric, I always try to pick up and press down with my iron rather than running along the edge and risking warping my fabric a bit. And once I'm done with the first lengthwise edge, I am going to go back along the other side and press that side down 1/2 inch as well. Now that our edges are pressed in, we're going to fold our strap in half lengthwise again. As you can see, I have the wrong sides together, and I'm going to iron it down so that the right sides are facing out. And once I'm done pressing that, I'm going to use some pins to hold it in place before we take it over to the sewing machine. You'll want to do this with both straps, and once you're done, you'll be left with something that looks a bit like this. Now we're going to sew our straps together. So you're going to sew about a 1/4 inch from the edge, and you're going to sew along both of the lengthwise edges that we just ironed down. Make sure that you're not still using a basting stitch, but you'll want to be using a shorter stitch length for this. I'm using about a 3, maybe a little bit less than that. This stitching is going to be seen on your bag, so make sure you're using a thread color that you like. You can either use a complementary color so that it blends in a bit. I'm actually going to use a white so that the top stitching stands out a bit. Just be sure to take your time so that you have a nice straight stitch on both sides of your straps. Now we are going to attach the straps to the main body pieces. On the body piece, you're going to measure in from the side edge. The exact measurements can be found in step 5 of your PDF sewing pattern, depending on which size tote you are making. Then you're going to place the outside edge of your strap at this mark, and you're going to line up the edge of the strap with the bottom of the bag. The strap should cover up the side edges of your pocket where we basted them in place. Now we're going to pin the straps in place, and then once you're done with your first side, you're going to loop the strap back down and repeat on the other edge, again measuring in from the side of the main body. You're also going to want to measure 2 inches down from the top of the bag because this is our mark to stop sewing here. You don't want to sew above the top edge of your bag because it will get in the way when we're trying to sew our lining later on. And again, don't forget to do this for both sides of your bag. Now we're going to sew the straps onto the main body pieces. We're going to do this by sewing over the top stitching that we already have on our straps. You'll be sewing down both edges of each strap on both sides of the bag, making sure that you're stopping 2 inches from the top edge of the main body piece. When you get to that 2-inch stopping point, you have 2 options here. You can either backstitch and start clean on the other side of the strap, or you can sew a straight line across. It's totally up to you. I am going to sew a straight line across on my bag today, just to give the strap a little more strength and structure. I'm using about a 3 stitch length here as well. You can use an even shorter stitch length if you want, just to make sure those straps are really secure to the bag. Once the straps are on your bag, we're going to take the bottom body piece and connect it to the main body. You're going to pin it right sides together, so the top of the bottom piece should be connecting to the bottom of the top piece. Now we're going to sew these together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Be sure to repeat this step for both sides of the bag. Now we're going to take our bag over to the ironing board and press open the seam that we just created. As you can see, I have my seam allowance pointed towards the bottom of my bag. Now we're going to top stitch that seam along the bottom body of the bag. I'm using the edge of my presser foot as my guide and lining that up along the edge of my fabric. You'll also just want to be mindful when you get to the straps that the fabric is going to be a bit bulkier there, so just take it slow and make sure that you don't break any needles. Now that the 2 sides of our bag are complete, we're going to attach them together by placing them right sides together. You'll want to pin around both sides and the bottom of your tote bag and pay careful attention to where those seams are between the main body and the bottom body. You'll want to make sure that those are aligned so that when you flip your bag inside out, there'll be a nice straight line. Now we're going to sew along the side edges and the bottom edge to connect our 2 pieces, and we're sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance. When I get to the bottom corner, I like to leave my needle down and simply lift my presser foot to rotate to the next seam, but you can always just sew straight through. And again, remember when you get to those bulky seams where we attached the bottom body to the main body, just take it nice and slow. To give our tote bag some shape, now we're going to cut out a square at the bottom corner of each side of our tote bag. Step 9 in your PDF instructions will have the exact size square you need to cut out for both sizes of the tote bag. I prefer to mark this with chalk and then cut with scissors instead of just using my rotary cutter, just so I don't accidentally run past and overcut into my bag. At that inside corner of the new square that we just created, you're going to pinch the 2 sides of your bag apart. This is going to create a new seam that's perpendicular to the side seams and the bottom seam. Pin your new seam together and make sure that the bottom seam and the side seam match up for a nice transition. I like to have my seam allowance from the side seam and the bottom seam pointing in different directions just so I don't create too much bulk. And once you're done pinning that together, it should look a little something like this. Back over at our sewing machine again, we're going to sew this seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Be sure to backstitch the beginning and the end of these seams so that they don't come undone later. The outside of our bag is now ready for the lining, so it's time to prep the lining. We're going to repeat steps 8 through 10, but this time all with the lining. So that begins with stitching the side seams and the bottom seams together at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, refer to step 9 to see what size square you need to cut out of the bottom corners of your lining, and then again you're going to pinch it together to create that new perpendicular seam. And again, we're sewing that seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. If you need more of a refresher, just rewind the video or refer to steps 8 through 10 in your PDF instructions. The lining of our bag and the outside shell are both complete now, so it's time to attach the two together. As you can see, the main body of my bag is still inside out, and I'm going to tuck the straps in so that they don't get in the way. The lining of your bag should be turned so that the correct side is facing out. This way, when we pin them together, you'll have the correct sides of each bag facing each other. So when you're pinning the two pieces together, you should be able to see the raw edges of the lining and the raw edges of the main body of your bag. I'm placing the lining of my bag inside the main body, but you don't need to make sure it's laying flat. All you need to do is make sure that the top seam lines up, and you're going to want to align the lining and the main body at the side seams. Then you're going to proceed to pin all the way around, and you're going to want to mark an opening to make sure that you're able to flip your bag right sides out once you're done sewing. The bigger the gap you leave, the easier it's going to be to turn your bag right sides out, so I suggest leaving at least a 5 to 7 inch gap, if not even more than that. Generally, the stiffer and the bulkier your fabric is, the bigger the hole you're going to want to leave. Now we're going to sew the body of the bag to the lining, and again we're using 1/2 inch seam allowance. Remember to backstitch at the beginning and the end of your stitching so that when you flip the bag inside out, you don't accidentally rip your seam open. Also be mindful that your straps are out of the way and you're not sewing them in with the lining of your bag. Now we need to turn our bag right sides out. So you're going to go in through the hole that you left in the top of your bag, and you're just going to reach in and start pulling the bag out through that hole. So we're going to be turning it right sides out. As you can see, I am struggling just a little bit because I left my hole a little bit smaller than I should have, but just push and pull, work the fabric through there, and just take your time so that you're not ripping that seam. And once you get near the end here, I am going to keep the pieces separate just like this for now, so kind of stacked on top of each other. And before I push the lining down into the body of my bag, I'm going to just make sure all the corners are popped out, and then I'm going to go ahead and iron my seams as well. I'm just going to iron the main body of my bag. I'm not going to iron the lining because I would actually be ironing it in the opposite direction I want it to go in. So I'm just going to iron the seams to kind of help them lay flat and make sure my bag is the correct shape that I'd like it to be. Once you're all done ironing, you can start to stuff the lining of your bag down into the main body. Make sure that the lining is laying correctly inside your bag because now would be the time to fix it if you'd like to take any extra bulk out. Now we're going to iron the seam along the top of the bag that we just sewed so that we can go back in and top stitch it and close that opening. When ironing here, I do use my fingers to roll back the lining fabric a little bit lower than the outside of my bag, just so when you're looking at the bag from the outside, you won't be able to see the lining popping over the edge. I just use my fingers to roll the fabric down a bit before I iron, and then I like to stick pins in there just to keep it in place while I'm top stitching as well. And once you get to that opening that you had left, just make sure that the fabric from both sides of the bag, the lining and the outside, is tucked in about 1/2 inch where your seam allowance was. And then again, you'll just iron it around the top like normal, and it should fall into place pretty easily with the rest of your seam. And our final step is to top stitch around the top edge of your bag to keep the lining in place and close the hole that we had. Be mindful of the straps and just make sure you keep those out of the way. I'm stitching about 1/4 inch from the top of my bag, and that was our last step, so we are all done, and you should be left with a super adorable canvas tote. Thank you so much for sewing with me today. I can't wait to see all your bags. Be sure to tag me in them. Be sure to like and comment on this video, and make sure you subscribe so you can see when I launch my next bag pattern. I already have so many ideas piling up and I can't wait to share them all with you.